He figured he'd buried his darkness 20 years back. Folks around those parts called him just an aging farmer, minding his herds on the dusty flats of Wyoming. But the ones who'd heard his old name, they recalled a different story. A fella who could drop a soul from 200 yards out, eyes steady as stone. A fella who vanished the day he found a cause to quit the trade. His name was Harlan Kane. For 2 whole decades, he'd kept to the quiet. He bred mules and he mended gates. He never laid a finger on a firearm. His wife used to tease that he'd swapped lead for lines of scripture. But when she passed last winter, the cabin fell still once more. Empty bowls, chilled brew, the hollow rang of pleas that went unheard. Only his girl kept the spark in him. Her name was Leela. She'd wed a merchant in a hamlet called Dust Creek, a peaceful spot, 3 days' journey from his spread. When her latest note came, she spoke of showers, of how she longed for his cornbread and how she hoped he'd come see her before the drifts piled high. So he cinched up his faithful mule, tossed a light pack, and set off eastward. 3 days solitary through the Badlands, they've got a knack for stirring up old specters. He skirted the parched gullies where he'd once planted bodies for pay. He passed the charred husk of a tavern where he'd plugged a lawman who pulled first, but not swift enough. Every stretch of trail murmured the same doubt. Could a soul truly turn the page, or did yesterday just doze till something roused it? By the time he hit the waterway's curve and the heavens bled into copper, he paused to let his mule drink. Then he spotted a form by the tree line, a lady, slumped against the bark, half sunk in muck, her garb ripped and ragged, soul sliced and oozing. He reckoned she was gone. Then she lifted her gaze. Her face was youthful, yet gaunt, her eyes the shade of cinders. She tried to rise, tottered, and crumpled once more. He edged nearer, palm drifting near his belt from old routine. The lady recoiled, wheezing through tears. "I can't bottle it up any longer," she breathed. "Just finish it fast." For a heartbeat he locked up. The way she phrased it, the way her frame quivered like one who'd already settled with the end. It struck him fiercer than any slug ever had. He dropped to a knee, shrugged off his jacket, and draped it over her shoulders. Her flesh was frostbit. He offered water, then murmured, "Who laid this on you?" She stayed mum, just fixed on the stream. Harlan eyed her whist. Cord marks, the sort earned from being hauled. Something buried in him rumbled awake. The very itch that used to flare before each contract, before each squeeze of the trigger. But now it wasn't for coin. It was ancient. It was blacker. As dusk slunk in and the water went ink dark, Harlan sensed yesterday drawn breath again. And as he watched the shattered lady shiver under the moon, one query seared his thoughts. What if her skewing her demanded he unearth the slayer he'd interred 20 years prior? The flames popped beside the stream. Harlan sat guarding the lady's slumber, her features jerking now and then like she battled phantoms in her sleep. Her attire was shredded and frayed, her palms raw, her breaths thin. He didn't know her handle and she didn't volunteer one. He just dubbed her Kid, though she seemed around 30, perhaps less. When dawn crept up, the mist peeled back lazy. She cracked her lids and jumped at him still there. He passed her a tinted Java, bold and sharp. She grasped it with quaking fingers, murmuring, "Why didn't you end me last night?" He regarded her with weary gentleness, like a soul who'd witnessed too much dying to ever crave it for another. He gazed at the vapor curling between them. "I'm through with ending lives," he said. She studied him long, her mouth quivering like she ached to laugh her but couldn't. "No one's ever truly through with it," she said softly. Then she twisted away, clutching the jacket he'd lent her. Harlan boosted her onto his mule and they traveled wordless. The terrain sprawled, vast and barren, withered weeds, scorched barriers, and a vault of sky too immense for one man's musings. He kept stealing looks at her image in the saddle glass, her eyes sunken but keen, like one who'd endured excess and braced for its return. By midday they neared the rim of Dust Creek. He recalled the smell of fresh lows from his girl's stoop, the joy that once bounced from the meadows, but now the breeze bore another note, a tang he knew by heart, metal and soot. The door to his girl's home hung ajar. The drapes were yanked down, dishes smashed on the planks. He stepped in calling her name, no reply, just hush dense enough to strangle. Then he spotted the corpse. His son-in-law sprawled prone by the board, the back of his skull caved in. He sank to one knee, the burden of 2 decades slamming back into his ribs. The lady behind him inhaled sharp and clamped her lips. She eyed the gashes, then Harlan, her eyes wide with a mix of dread and shame. "That's them," she breathed. "The crew who ran the den I fled?" Harlan pivoted to her gradual. "You're saying the bastards who did this hail from that spread?" She bobbed her head. "And they've snatched your girl." For a stretch he didn't budge. He just stared at the floorboards, jaw clenched, breath measured, the rasp of an old heart splintering anew. The lady tried to talk, but he lifted a palm for hush. He rose, strode to the nook, and pried a wobbly plank. Beneath sat a bundled roll of greased fabric. Within, his vintage carbine, the one that once made his legend dreaded across 3 territories. He dusted the tube and peered out the pane toward the dipping sun. Then he asked, voice low and even, "Tell me where they hauled her." And in that instant, the mild old farmer everyone had forgotten was erased. What stepped through that threshold was something altogether different. But the moon ascended gradual that night. Harlan and Mira rode till the path grew dim and tight. The gust bore the whiff of rye and pine smoke. He caught chuckles from afar, harsh and vile, the sort from fellas who'd never tasted reckoning. Mira gestured toward a cluster of hovels by the town's fringe. "That's it," she breathed. "The women are stashed there. The grand shack in the center belongs to the boss who lords it." Harlan scanned the glows, the sentries, the hounds chained by the rail. Every noise echoed another era. The evenings he stalked men for bounty, the chill inhale before the shot. He hunkered behind a toppled trunk and spoke low. "How many watchers you recall?" "Maybe 7, she said. 2 at the entry, 3 by the barn, the rest within." He nodded like a man tallying posts. No rage, just reckoning. They bided till the tavern tunes swelled loud enough to mask their tread. Harlan glided first, sleek as dusk. His blade kissed the gullet of the first sentry before he could spin. The second crumpled with a snapped spine. But Harlan's joint howled from the strain. He flattened against the plank, panting heavy, sweat blending with grit. 2 decades sand scrap had taken toll. Mira's breath caught, but she tailed him nonetheless. They ducked behind the barn where a lamp swayed soft in the breeze. The mounts fidgeted, restless. Harlan stroked one's nape to soothe. Then he spied something spiked to the beam. A lady's bow, soiled but known. He knew the weave. It was Lila's. He said nothing. He didn't need to. They slid into the side passage of the shack. Mira breathed. "The chambers for the women are rearward." He nodded. The corridor reeked of toil, booze, and scent. Murmurs floated from a space ahead. 3 gents lounged dealing cards, their guffaws graining the walls. Harlan hoisted his carbine, steadied his wind, and loosed twice. The third lunged for his iron, but halted when Mira emerged from gloom, aiming her pistol dead at him. Her grip trembled, but her line held. "Where's the lass you dragged in last week?" she said.
He hawked crimson and grumbled, "Upstairs." Harlan didn't linger. He clocked the gent hard enough to floor him senseless, then spun to Mira. "We snag her and we bolt. You stick tight." They crept up the timber steps, each plank moaning under their weight. From behind a barred portal drifted the faintest wail. Lila's tone. Harlan clenched his carbine. "Hang tight, darlin', your paw's here." And for the first spell in 2 decades, he wasn't a farmer anymore. He was what he'd always excelled at, a soul who knew precisely how to snuff wickedness. So brew yourself a steaming mug of tea and linger right here. Tell me the hour, your spot, and where you're tuning in from. And if your pulse is still racing a tad, tap that subscribe key, because the dark's far from done. The portal yielded with one stout boot. Harlan entered first, carbine poised, his gaze icy and keen. The passage stank of haze, cheap fragrance, and exertion. Lamps flickered along the boards, casting lengthy shadows that danced when none stirred. Behind him, Mira's breath quavered as she trailed, her little pistol wobbling in her grasp. Somewhere above, a woman wept, gentle, fractured, and terrified. Harlan tilted his head a fraction. "Wait here," he breathed. But Mira shook her head, her tone gravelly. "Not again. I'm not biding while another acts." They ascended the stairs together, deliberate and firm. Every step groaned beneath their soles. Down below, a piano plinked 2 off-key notes before falling mute.
The initial chamber was vacant. The next held a cot with shredded linens and crimson on the cushion. Then a third portal bolted from without. Harlan pressed his ear to it. He caught it then, a voice feeble but dear. "Pa!" He didn't pause. One blast shattered the latch, the timber splintered, and the portal swung wide. Lila sat on the planks, wrists tied, her face streaked with grime and salt. When she beheld him, she inhaled like her chest had rediscovered wind for the first spell. Harlan let his carbine fall, drew her near, and sliced the bonds with his blade. She clung to him, sobbing. "They swore you'd never show. They swore you'd forgotten me." He smoothed the strands from her brow. "I never forgot," he said gentle. "Not one sunrise. And I never will." But before the instinct could root, the click of a hammer sliced the air. A lanky figure loomed in the frame. His coat was rich crimson silk, his grin broad and foul. "Well now," the figure drawled, "ain't this sweet?" Harlan rose, frame still as rock. "You stole my girl." The figure chuckled. "You wrecked my trade." He lifted his shooter, but Harlan didn't blink. 2 reports split the quiet. One scarred the wall, the other pierced the figure dead center. He folded, maw agape, eyes bulging in shock. Another watcher barreled in from the hall. Mira's hand shook fierce on the pistol, but she squeezed anyway. The round flew wide, nicking his arm. The watcher reeled, swearing. Harlan whirled and ended him with a lone carbine slug to the torso. Mira gawked at her quivering paws, stunned the iron had even barked. Harlan glanced back at her, voice coarse but steady. "You held up. You're still drawing air. That's what counts." The lamp crashed, fuel spilled swift. A spark leapt to the drapes, then the rug, then all. Lila cried out, "It's blazing!" Harlan seized her by the limb. "We're out." But as they dashed past the rear chambers, he glimpsed 2 other lasses barred inside, hammer in the portals, faces aglow in flame. He booted the latches free, his joints buckling a touch from the jolt. Mira dashed in beside him, hauling one lass out, while hacking deep, her face smeared with soot. Another lurched behind them, grasping for Harlan's palm. He tugged her near, bracing her against his flank as the blaze bellowed astern. "Keep going," he bellowed. "Don't glance back." They bolted through the passage, fumes gnawing their throats, the scorch pursuing every stride. Outside, the chill struck like mercy. Behind them, the blaze blazed till its beams split and tumbled.
For a lengthy beat, none uttered. The blaze shimmered against the night vault. Then they heard it, the thunder of hooves charging swift from the crest. Harlan raised his carbine, jaw firm, eyes squinting in the gloom. He said naught. He didn't need to, because every soul who's ever fled his yesterday knows what that rumble pretends. He didn't know if they'd survive the coming clash, but for the first spell, he didn't mind. He'd already reclaimed what counted. Dawn arrived gradual and hushed. The haze still lingered in the vale, fluting above the charred ribs of what once was the shack. The blaze had raged all night. Now, only cinders and stillness lingered. Harlan stood by the rail, his coat tattered, his palms scorched, the carbine dangling easy at his side. Beside him, Lila sat swathed in a quilt, her eyes raw but vital. Mira leaned against a trunk, aiding the other lasses who'd escaped. The crisp morning gust bore the scent of damp soil and ancient woe. For a good while, no one spoke. At last, Lila shattered the quiet. "Pa, how'd you track me?" He regarded her, weary gaze softening. "I didn't," he said low. "The Almighty must have done the tracking. I just trailed what ached." Mira smiled faint. "You rescued us," she said. Harlan shook his head. "No, I just quit fleeing what I should have met long ago." He turned his eyes to the climbing sun. The glow struck the stream, shimmering crimson like blood rinsing pure. Somewhere within, he felt the ancient phantoms hush. For the first spell in 20 years, his fingers ceased their tremor. The lasses clustered near the flames, murmuring gratitude. One inquired what they ought to do now. Harlan prodded the embers with a twig, then said, "You begin anew. You seek a burg that'll have you. You live honest. And when you spot a soul like me approaching, you turn the other way." They chuckled soft, tears yet on their cheeks. He regarded Mira, then truly regarded her. The same lady who once pleaded he end her days was now lifting others to live. There was something lovely in that, and something mending. When she met his gaze, she said, "You're not the legend they spun tales about anymore." He gave a measured nod. "Maybe not, but a soul's yesterday doesn't fade. It just bides to see what sort of soul he'll prove next." The breeze rose, scattering the cinders across the meadow like flakes. Harlan shut his eyes, inhaling deep. He didn't know where they'd head next, but for the first spell, the path ahead didn't dawn him. Maybe that's what absolution truly is, not erasing, not pardoned, just learning to tread again without cowering from who you were. So let me pose you this. If your yesterday came rapping at your doorstep, would you muster the grit to meet it, or would you keep feigning it never was? Sometimes the toughest feat a soul can pull is gathering the shards, starting fresh. But sometimes, that's precisely what redeems him. If this tale stirred a spark in you, go on and like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now brew yourself a steaming mug of tea, ease back a moment, and tell me what hour it is where you are, and from what nook of the globe are you tuning in.